Safe communication online with children and young people. During the COVID-19 pandemic, organisations are having to look at alternative ways of communicating with children and young people, including online. Organisations are using lots of different methods to stay connected, such as text messaging, email and video calls. Here are some guidelines to help staff and volunteers communicate safely with children and young people online. Risk assessment. Organisations must consider the most appropriate method of communication and assess the risks involved. Measures must be put in place to reduce any risks identified. Seek approval from your organisation. The communication must be approved by the organisation itself. No staff member or volunteer should contact a child or young person without prior approval from their line manager or volunteer coordinator. Use your work account. Staff or volunteers should use their work account or number for any communication and not their personal ones. Work devices should also be used where possible. Obtain parental consent. Communication with children and young people, including online, must only take place with prior written consent from their parents or carers. Some organisations ask for consent from the young person themselves if they are 16 years or over. It is recommended parents should give consent alongside the child or young person in these circumstances. Make sure parents or carers are fully informed. Send an email to parents or carers which explains what method of communication you intend to use, the purpose of the contact, who will be involved, and practical things such as a date and time. Their reply could incorporate their consent. Consider communicating in groups. Organisations can get creative about how they communicate. Link up with a colleague and try an activity with a group of children and young people, rather than one-to-one interaction. Use the parents or carers' email address or telephone number to send the invite to. They can oversee the call. Set boundaries. Remind parents or carers about choosing an appropriate space in their home for the call to take place. Appropriate dress is another issue to consider and keep it professional. Where there is a group of children and young people involved, remind them that the normal ground rules apply. For example, listening to leaders, being respectful, and not using bad language. Where live streaming is involved, children and young people need to know that any comments they make will be seen by others. These boundaries or guidelines should be issued in advance of the session, and participants should be reminded of them at the beginning of the session. Adhere to your organisation's safeguarding policy. Your Safeguarding Children and Young People policy still applies. Staff and volunteers should adhere to the guidelines in their code of behaviour and follow agreed reporting procedures if they have any concerns or where a disclosure is made. Think about the platform being used as your communication method. Avoid the use of social media platforms. These can share a lot of data. Some organisations are using apps such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, as less information is required to access them. Each of these platforms has their own privacy policy. Staff should familiarise themselves with these and make parents or carers aware of them. Familiarise yourself with the platform settings. Set up the online session with a meeting ID and passcode to be issued to participants. When setting up the session on your platform, set video cameras on and off accordingly. If cameras need to be turned on, consider the use of virtual backgrounds. Use the waiting room function. Don't allow participants to join the session before the host and only admit those registered. Consider the screen share settings. Who has permission to share their screen? Think about the sound settings. If needs be, mute people on entry before you run through the boundaries and ask that microphones are muted by participants when they aren't speaking. Consider the chat settings. Who has access to information shared via chat? If required, set the chat function to be viewed by the host only. Familiarise yourself with the function for removing participants. Report users through the platform if they have acted inappropriately. With children and young people spending more time online, organisations, parents and carers can use this opportunity to educate them on how to stay safe. They can also encourage children and young people to model responsible behaviour themselves when they are online. Further standards and guidance on keeping children safe can be found at volunteernow.co.uk. Why not visit our safeguarding webpage to find out what training is available?